All right. So one of the things we talked about was interlacing last week, and I kind of maybe I don't want to give you the impression that interlacing is kind of the way of the dinosaur. Interlaced video with two fields that are laced together has a purpose still. I kind of muttered under my breath that we're stuck with this 1940s, 50s idea of interlace that we kind of can't shake, which is kind of true, but it comes in very handy in one particular place, and that's frame rate conversion, and particularly frame rate conversions from 24 frame to 30 frame and higher, and multiples of 30. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today briefly. Um, so there's more than one reason to convert frame rates, and there's more than one way. The more than one reason, there's a number of different rationales to convert your frame rates. Sometimes it's because you shot in 24 and you want to show it on your TV, and your TV is not 24 frame native, so you have to convert to the frame rate of the TV. Now, a lot of TVs nowadays do the conversion internally. They have processors inside them. I would always say, as a professional, don't trust your display. Like, don't trust automatic. It's like cameras. Don't trust automatic because you don't know what's going to happen. It might look good, it might not look good. And it might look good on one TV and crappy on a different TV because they use different software and hardware combinations. So remember that, like I said, TVs today are running processors inside way more than they were even 5 or 6 years ago. Um, and they have the other thing is they have weird names for their frame rate conversion. They'll call it things like motion smoothing. They have all kinds of terms for it, which doesn't really help you figure out what's going on. And there's more than one way to convert frames. So we'll talk, like I said, a little bit about that. Remember again the price, speed, quality triangle, right? Uh, you can have fast service good, but it won't be cheap. You can have good service cheap, but it won't be fast. And you can have fast service cheap, but it won't be good. All right. So this is also true with conversion. The more you spend on software and time, so if you're using like media encoder and such, if you do more passes to get a better conversion, like do VVR or two pass, it'll double or triple the time it takes, but you'll get a better result. So you have to pay, and that's a call you have to make. There's no clear answer. People always say, well, which one should I choose? It really depends on what you need. If you need a quick output for the director, then who cares about the quality so much? As long as you explain to them, it's going to look a little fuzzy. It'll look better when we're finished. But at least you get a quick output for the director to look at. But if they want a high quality output for streaming or broadcast, then it's going to take time, right? So just keep that in mind. Anyway, telecine. So telecine used to be, and this is actually one of the jobs I had way back in the dark ages, was transferring film to video. And it was transferring film to video in the old days by pointing a film projector at a video camera and basically shooting the projector. You basically put the lens of the projector in front of the lens of the camera, nose to nose, and that was called telecine. Tele from television and cine from film. Nowadays, telecine is used to talk about the frame rate conversion when you go from 24 frames per second to 30 frames a second. It's sometimes called a telecine. Sometimes there's all kinds of other terms for it, but this is one of them. The results are interlaced, and this is we'll explain why that is and why the interlace is very handy for this. Uh, and so here it is. There's something called a 3-2 pull down, and what that means is the pull down term relates to the fact that back in the day, film is pulled down through the projector by a series of claws that grab the sprocket holes. So I don't know if you know this or not, but when film runs through a projector, it doesn't just run on wheels with teeth like some people think. In fact, there's a portion of the film that sits right in front of the lens in what's called the gate. And that portion of the film isn't run by gears. It's actually pulled at by claws, and it's pulled down from the top. That's just the way it works. Anyway, the point of that is that that's where the pull down term comes from. If you wonder why it's called pull down, it has nothing to do with the actual conversion. It's just a hangover from the old days. But what is 3-2 pull down? Well, what 3-2 pull down means is that every frame, there are 4 frames, let's just say in this example, there's 4 frames of 24p, right? Because it's progressive. We'll say 24p because it is progressive. But there's 4 frames of film, 4 frames of 24 frame, right? But you end up with 5 frames of 30 frame. And how do you do that? Because the first frame is exposed 1.5 frames. So remember that we talked about interlace having 2 fields, right? And I don't know if do I have an illustration of that? Sort of. I don't really have it on this slideshow, but if you remember interlace, I'll use this Simpsons illustration for a second. You can see that there's two half images overlaid on top of each other, right? And so where the colors are really vibrant is where the two layers match exactly, and where the colors are kind of faded and you see ghost images is where the two layers don't exactly overlay. And we'll get to that in a second. But nonetheless, there's two fields that are overlaid over top of each other to make a single frame. So when you go back and do a 3:2 pull down, the first frame of film, or the first frame of 24p, is exposed on the first field, the second field, and what's called the third field, which is actually the first field of the second frame. And then the second frame of the film is exposed on the second field of the second frame and the first field on the third frame. Okay, so we have three fields, then we have two fields. Now we can't stop here because we only have a half frame so far at 3, and we need an even number. So we do it again with frame 3 of 24 frames, and that's half of frame 3 of 30 frames, and then the entire frame 4, field 7 and 8. These are numbered 7 and 8. Now in reality, just to stop for a second, the fields are always numbered 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. This is only numbered 1 to 10 just to illustrate how many fields in total are involved, but each frame only has two fields. So field 1 would be field 1, 2, frame 1 would be field 1, 2 on 30 frame 2 would be field 1, 2, frame 3, 1, 2, etc. So let me just reiterate. So we're at frame 2, the second half of frame 2, which is in this case numbered field 4, and then the first half of frame 3 is frame 2 of the film. Frame 3 of the film is half of frame 3, and then the entire frame 4 of video. And then frame 4 of the film is entire frame 5. So now we have 5 frames. We've ended up with 5 frames from a 4-frame source. And that allows us now with 5 frames to end up with something that'll divide evenly into 30, right? Because 4 won't. And we end up with a system where we can convert 4-frame, 24-frame film into 30-frame video. All right? I'll let that sink in for a second while we move on. So here's another illustration just to show them numbered sort of sideways. So if we look at A, B, C, D, now A, B, C, D replacing 1, 2, 3, 4. So A is all of frame 1, B is all of frame 2 and a half of frame 3. C is half of frame 3 and half of frame 4, and D is half of frame 4 and all of frame 5, right? So the double A, the triple B, the double C, and the triple D is the video output, but the A, B, C, D at the top is the film input, okay? And it's, if you look at the pattern, it's 3, 2, 3, 2, sometimes called 2, 3, there's arguments both sides. I call it 3, 2 pull down, a lot of places do. You can call it, you can hear it being called 2, 3 pull down. But it's 3, 2, 3, 2, and that means the number of fields involved. So what does it look like? Here's another illustration, and we'll move on. So what you end up with is this. If we look at the film frames, A, B, C, D, and we look at the video frames, so here are your, all of frame A, 1.5 of frame B, half of frame C, and 1.5 of frame D, right? Remember that's what I said before. If you put all those interlaced fields together, the odds and the evens, you end up with an entire frame A, an entire frame B, a frame C that's split between two, pardon me, a frame C and D that are split between two video frames and frame D, right? Now, on its face, it looks like this is going to be kind of gross looking, right? And it is kind of. You get this a little bit. This is what's called an interlace artifact. And these interlace artifacts are exaggerated with 24p telecine 3:2 pull down conversions, more so than interlace artifacts would be with normal video. So normal video, the two fields occur one after the other, right? So you end up with this. If the vehicle is moving during the frame, this is normal, this is not a conversion, right? If the vehicle is moving during the frame, stop, calm down. If the video is moving, the action is happening quickly during a video frame that's interlaced, the first field occurs and then the second field occurs and they're offset slightly in time and you get what's called combing, which is this artifact, right? And that's, so if you do a 24p pull down to video, the combing artifacts are much worse in some of the frames. And you get this. This would be the combined frames where the motion has moved forward in the film frame from one to the other, but the video frame is still capturing that same frame, right? So there are some artifacts to it. However, it still gives you a fairly smooth and pretty much acceptable to the human eye. So we're looking at this because we've stopped this frame. This is a capture of one individual frame. But if you go to a lot of sites, like for example, 100fps.com, you'll see some of this stuff. I think they still have clips in motion. You won't notice the artifacts. If you train yourself, you can spot them, but the average person doesn't notice them, right? And you can use all kinds of tools. Like for example, this is untreated. This one has been treated, this frame has been treated slightly to reduce the combing. You can see the little black lines are thinner, right? You can use things like motion smoothing and frame interpolation and create new data points and end up with a much smoother image again, right? So there's all kinds of ways to improve this pull down transfers. What I want to outline, one of the reasons I want to explain this to you is that when you shoot, a lot of students get it in their heads, particularly when they're starting out at BCIT, they want to shoot in 24 frame because that's what the pros do. Well, the thing is, remember the pros are projecting, delivering on 24 frame, right? If you go to a movie theater and you watch in the screen, you're watching a 24 frame presentation. There is none of this interpolation going on. You're looking at the frame rate that it was made at. But the moment you take that 24 frame material and try to output it onto video, video is going to be 30 frames, unless with the exception, you've got 24 frame native hardware and software and no conversion is happening. And you can guarantee that no conversion is happening, right? So that's the other thing that happens. People assume that, for example, the monitor is 24 frame native. So you can play 24 frame video in that monitor, but haha, you'll find out that, oh, I don't know, I don't want to name a piece of software and malign it, but you'll find out, let's say, for example, that you're playing it through iTunes for some reason, or you're using Apple TV, and Apple TV is only 30 frame native. So even though the monitor is 24 frames and the source is 24 frames, software or the hardware in between might do a conversion on you without you knowing it. So as a professional, you can't do that. You've got to know. You've got to do tests, right, to make sure. So one of the tests would be output it through the Apple TV, go to your monitor, and look at the frame rate and see if some monitors will report back to you whether it is in 24 frame mode or 30 frame mode, right? So there, I said it again. There are ways to fix these artifacts is all I'm trying to say. But shooting on 24 frame for its own sake, remember this, if you're shooting on 24 frame, and maybe I should move off this slide to here. If you're shooting on 24 frame and you're at any place going to 30 frame, even if you edit on 30 frame, there are 6 frames that don't exist every second, right? So that means the computer, the software has to make up 6 frames every second. And those are going to be not perfect. There's no way known yet to do a proper scan from 24 to 30 without some sort of artifact being introduced, because 6 frames just don't exist. Now software is getting better and better, and now we're using things like animation in between software. There's all kinds of interpolation software, and interpolation just means that you're looking at 2 different frames and trying to make a frame in the middle, right? Sometimes called in-betweening. So there's software getting better at that, but all those made up frames are still artificial, right? So there's almost no way to know where the new frames are being added in your 24 frame stream. So always try to do the conversion ahead of time, right? Always make an output for whatever it is you're producing. So if you're shooting 24 and you've got to output on 30, I would suggest editing in 24, if you want my honest opinion, and then do the conversion at the end in something like media. Well, I would, you know what, I'm not even gonna recommend software because that's a mugsy game. I don't know, I haven't done a survey of all the software and how it does the conversion, but what I'm saying is stay in your native format as much as possible all the way through. First off, we're going to talk about this later when we talk about codecs. Changing frame rates and codecs back and forth is a terrible thing to do, because every time you do that, you get degradation, right? So shoot in 24, edit in 24, or shoot in 24, convert right away, like a DIT will do this, convert right away to 30 for editing, edit in 30, and then you've got your 24 master, your 30 output. But you've got to make sure when you're editing in 30 that you're looking at all the frames, not every single one, but you're sampling every so often to make sure you don't get, you know, bad stuff happening. Anyway. So let's talk about resolution conversion very briefly. This is something else people make the mistake of doing, shooting in 4K and then editing in 1080 HD, or shooting in HD and then editing in 4K or outputting in 4K. Don't change resolution unless you absolutely have to. And again, I would recommend at the end. I would do all my conversion if it was me, and this is, I shouldn't say if it was me, when it was me doing this, I would do all my conversions when I was finished. I would always try to edit in the native format of the shooting as close as possible. And sometimes you can't do that, but I would always try to, and then do all my conversion at the end when it's finished, right? The only issue is how much material in your piece is going to be X resolution. So if you're shooting something in 4K and you've got a couple of 1080 shots in it, then I would edit in 4K and upres those individual shots. Because your final product is 4K, you're going to want to see that upres in the edit to make sure that it looks good. I wouldn't down convert your 4K to 1080, shoot the whole thing in 4K, edit in 1080, and then up convert at the end. That would make no sense. So it does kind of depend. And again, for students and sort of newbies to this, sometimes it's best just to let automatic things happen. Like Adobe, what's good / bad about Adobe is it will do a lot of these conversions for you. If you have a clip that doesn't match the sequence's frame rate or resolution, it will convert it automatically. That's easy, that's great, but the problem is it's done it for you. You have no idea how it looks. And early on in your career, it may not matter, but one of these days it will. And you're gonna have to learn that at some point. I don't know why I include this slide anymore because it's really an uphill battle. But the whole point of this slide is that as you get further away from a monitor, the resolution drops just because of the way our eyes see things. Basically, a 4K, is it a, let me just see here. Yes, I think it's that at 10 feet, an HD monitor looks like standard def, and at 10 feet, a 4K monitor looks like HD. So the only advantage really to getting a higher resolution is you can get a bigger monitor. So getting a small 4K monitor is really not much good unless you're sitting right in front of it. You know, so a computer monitor, yes, that's perfect because you're sitting right in front of a computer. But if you're buying a 4K TV and then you're going to sit 10 feet back from it, it's going to look like HD. So you really have to wonder, why do you have 4K? Unless it's 85 inches or 105 inches or something really big, then you're going to start to see the difference much further away. So just keep that in mind as well when you're doing resolution conversions. Like, why are you doing it? Always question yourself whenever you're doing any kind of conversion, whether it's codec or frame rate. Just ask yourself, what's the point of this? Will they notice? You know, if for example a client wants something in 4K and you don't have 4K equipment, it might be acceptable to do the whole thing in HD from your end and then just up-res it at the end and deliver them a 4K final product, depending on what they're doing with it. Right? Always good to know that. And then the last, excuse me, thing is color space conversion, and this comes along with the territory of HD, 4K, et cetera, because we have different color spaces, which we talked about briefly. The thing that happens with color space conversion, and this is again, you got to be careful, is something called dithering. And what dithering is when basically one color is converted to the closest color inside the color space. So if you have, did I include? No, of course I didn't. If you remember the CIE diagram, and maybe, you know what, it might be better if I show this to you guys. I mean, where's my CIE diagram? Hang on, let's just, oh, hang on a second. CIE diagram. Right, here we go. Do I have an example of multiple color spaces? As he mutters, you can't even see what I'm looking at as I mutter to myself. No, so you know what? I'm just going to take this one here. We will do this, and we will do stop share, and then we'll start sharing again. Okay. So talking about color space conversion, if you look at the CIE diagram, which is all the colors that humans can see, right? And then that triangle inside, which unfortunately is not labeled here as to what color space this is, but let's just assume it's any color space. Let's say it's 4K color space. I don't know this for a fact, but I need to say something to carry on. If there's colors that are outside that triangle, so let's just say, okay, let me stop. Let's just say that this is a 4K triangle and that the HD triangle would be smaller than this. It would be inside the 4K triangle, right? Although it's not on this drawing. Any colors that are in the 4K triangle that are outside the HD triangle would be what's called dithered, or automatically convert it to colors that are inside the HD triangle. And again, that isn't something you can control always, but it's something you should be aware of, that colors will shift. They will shrink towards the center of this CIE diagram as the color space triangle shrinks. And they will grow. In other words, they will change and shift to the edges of the CIE diagram if you go the other way. So if you go from HD to 4K, you will add more colors. Potentially, you could add more colors, but they will not be the actual colors that you captured in the first place. All right. So just be aware that that's happening. There's, like I say, it's really an advanced topic. When you get into colorists and color correction, which we'll talk about later on this term, we can touch on it a bit more. But understand that this is happening. Color space shifting is happening. All right. And it is called dithering. So that is that. So we'll stop share. Go back here. We will start share again. There we go. Play from here. Okay. Yeah, and it can be unpredictable. That's the whole point there. And I conclude this last slide because there might be a question on today's quiz about what dithering is. And it is the process of juxtaposing pixels of two colors to create the illusion that the third color is present. So basically what happens is you overlay two adjacent colors together to create the color that went away, that didn't exist in this new color space, right? So it only can be made of colors within the color space triangle you're dealing with. It can't be made of colors that are outside. So colors will shift. So that's the whole thing about conversion.